Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our conference on the future of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, advancing innovation, resilience, and collective action. My name is Shirley Graham, and I'm the director of the Athena Initiative, advancing human security in international affairs here at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. Today, we are turning our attention to the question of how we create a future that is equitable, just, and safe for every person on this planet during a time of rising authoritarianism and democratic backsliding. We feminists have always been future-focused, using our vision and imagination to find solutions to these challenges that we will speak of today. I still remember the excitement and the hope that I felt when I came across UN Security Council Resolution 1325 for the first time. That was 21 years ago, and I was doing my master's degree at Dublin City University. And really what I was excited about was the fact that women and girls were being centered in all aspects of peace and security. So this year, as we all know, marks the 25th anniversary of that UN Security Council Resolution 1325. And since then, progress has been made with the creation of, for example, new language, with women as subjects of international law, as agents of change, as political decision makers, as peace negotiators and security actors. The development of new processes, bringing gender perspectives and gender mainstreaming into peacekeeping and UN reporting. The expansion of roles such as gender advisors and gender focal points, and the creation of new roles such as women protection advisors. And also we have, adding to that, 115 national action plans setting out goals to achieve the vision of the broader Women, Peace and Security agenda, of which I know you're all probably very familiar with. However, the latest report on WPS has really revealed, obviously, very worrying decline. And as the UN Secretary General states in this UN report, the work of women human rights defenders and peace builders has become much more dangerous. Between 2023 and 2024, 4 times more women and children were killed in armed conflict compared to 21 and 22. 7 out of 10 women killed were in Gaza. During the same time period, conflict-related sexual violence increased by 87%. 58% of maternal deaths, 50% of newborn deaths, and 51% of stillbirths occurred in 29 countries in humanitarian crisis. And these numbers are expected to worsen due to the frequency of bombed maternity wards, blocked reproductive health care, and steep funding cuts. So, put simply, we have no choice. The Women, Peace and Security agenda must continue, and we need to continue its mobilizing force, bringing together people from across borders and from across political divides to inspire grassroots activism, academic research, and national and multilateral institutions' actions to end genocide and wars. In our hyper-militarized and hyper-polarized world, we need convenings like this one more than ever to provide space for deep conversations that harness our ideas, our knowledge, and our experiences, and that provide inspiration and determination to work together towards achieving the goals of WPS. So with that, I would now like to hand over to the President of Women in International Security, Lauren van Metre, who is going to talk us through the conversational framework that is going to shape our discussions for today. Thank you all so much.
Good morning, everyone. A warm welcome on behalf of WISE and a sincere thank you for your time, your participation, and most of all, your expertise as we spend the day together engaged in a forward leaning and clear eyed assessment of the future of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. When WISE began planning this conference, it was against a backdrop of a world in rapid transition, a world shifting quickly and not in the right direction. We see remilitarization, we see hybrid warfare, we see authoritarianism rising again. And at the same time, the institutions that have guided the global order for 80 years are straining under the weight of these new realities. We are in a liminal moment where the old world is breaking apart and the contours of the new one remain uncertain. But we have to remind ourselves that the Women, Peace, and Security agenda was born in such a liminal moment. As the Cold War ended, its dissolving norms and institutions gave rise to civil war, ethnic conflict, and global terrorism. WPS emerged from women's cross border solidarity, women who refused to be silent and demanded representation. They insisted that their experience, their leadership, shaped the future of peace and security. We need the audacity now to adapt WPS to a new constellation of threats. While we celebrate WPS, we must prepare for a very different future. And this conference is meant to help us do exactly that. We need to understand the security landscape ahead and understand how WPS must respond strategically and politically. For all the uncertainty we face in this liminal moment, two things are crystal clear. Militarization is accelerating and authoritarianism is rising. And hybrid warfare sits at the center of both. We at WISE assert that in a world defined by hybrid warfare, WPS must operate not only as a peace building framework, but as a strategic security doctrine. Authoritarian powers are using disinformation, cybersecurity, election interference, not just to confuse democracies, but to break them apart. They spread fear, they divide communities, they push executive overreach. Central to this strategy is the manipulation of gender, weaponizing misogyny, restricting women's rights, and suppressing women's political participations as a means of eroding democracy itself. Gender is a powerful lever for authoritarian consolidation. Western militaries do understand this, that if societies are the battlefield, then citizens are the front line of defense. We see in NATO's recent writings that Western security leaders understand that societal resilience is strategic deterrence, yet we still hear the need for a gender perspective or a lens in building this resilience. I think this approach is no longer sufficient. If gender is a terrain of modern hybrid warfare, then WPS must be a strategic countermeasure. If adapted to hybrid warfare, the WPS pillars become a framework for societal resilience and a strategy of deterrence and prevention. So, pillar one, prevention. We must interrupt the disinformation demobilization pipelines that fuel the violence that suppresses women's voice and leadership. Pillar two, participation. We must ensure that women lead in our security sectors as democracies militarize, so that our militarization does not undermine our democratic values. Pillar three, protection. We must build digital, political, and physical protection networks for women leaders and movements that are currently being targeted by authoritarian actors. Pillar four, recovery. We must prepare women to lead the restoration of social cohesion and democratic order when societies recoil from authoritarianism, as we have seen this week in the US elections. In an era when hybrid threats aim to fracture society itself, WPS is not a complement to security strategy, it is itself a strategy. It reinforces civic fabric, strengthens democratic resilience, and provides deterrence rooted not just in military power, but in societal cohesion. Our first two panels today on regional and emerging security threats will go deeper into this new security terrain and the strategic role that WPS must play. However, that's not it. By recalibrating the S in WPS, it's not enough. We must develop a political strategy and reframe WPS as a political movement, not merely a normative framework. Varieties of Democracy, or VDEM, tell us that 70% of the world now lives under authoritarian or oligarchic rule. The WPS agenda, the demands for inclusion, participation, accountability, is fundamentally a democratization movement. Thus, in the majority of the world, and increasingly in our multilateral institutions, WPS is a political opposition movement. In my 8 years working in the democracies field with others in this room, we know what successful opposition movements must do. They must build coalitions of coalitions. WPS must link arms with labor, youth, faith communities, and environmental movements whose aspirations overlap with our own. Our leaders must have the skills to build, sustain, and activate broad coalitions. That also means standing in solidarity with movements that have popular momentum if they advance our WPS goals. Successful movements take control of the narrative. Fear is the fuel of authoritarianism. Hope is the antidote, and it is one of the most powerful political tools that we have. We must shift away from narratives of backlash and erosion and instead tell a story of what is possible, the power and clarity of our WPS agenda. Successful movements shift the arena of contestation. When governments close doors, successful movements take their agendas to the public. When institutions stall, we build pressure from outside them. WPS must tap into the energy of social movements and civic actors who are already mobilizing for change. By doing this, by building broad coalitions, shaping narratives rooted in hope, and shifting the struggle to arena where people's voices are strongest, WPS can become an instrument of democratic renewal. This is how movements win. And this is how WPS must now move, not as a siloed agenda tucked inside institutions, but as a bold collective political force capable of reshaping them. Our final panel will explore the possibility of collective action, the opportunities, and the challenges. We sincerely hope that you leave the conference today inspired, informed, and even collectively organized to deploy the full power of WPS, its networks, leadership, and its collective spirit to secure a more democratic, peaceful, and resilient world. I now have the pleasure of introducing WIIS board member Kitty Pilgrim, award-winning journalist, former CNN anchor, and international journalist, an impressive 25-year career. She is a foreign policy expert and activist, but for us at WIIS, she has been a strong and ardent champion of WPS in international security, foreign policy, and journalistic communities. So Kitty, over to you.
Thank you, Laura. So I'm delighted to be here to honor the important 25th anniversary of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, and welcome to everyone. It will be an interesting and productive day. The subtitle of this conference is Advancing Resilience and Collective Action. And we all envision a forward-thinking discussion to evaluate the right for women to be involved in sustainable peace and security. And the foundation of the WPS movement, built by many of you in the room, is without question a bedrock of strong and stable societies around the globe. For many of you, this is your life's work, or you hope it will be your life's work, and you have made the commitment. Therefore, uncertainty is not part of this equation. I'm a journalist and a WPS advocate, and as a journalist, I am both a storyteller and a seeker of facts. Both the story and the facts support the WPS movement. Whether it is the story of a single individual or the painstaking collection of data that proves the benefits of WPS policy. The work speaks for itself. We need not convince others, we need not debate others, and we do not need permission to continue. Nor should we look for any government, organization, or individual for permission to continue. We find in our own conviction full authority to proceed. But how to proceed? So I am joined by some of the deepest thinkers on this topic, and I look forward to hearing their thoughts on a way forward with WPS in the future. Our first speaker joins us by recorded video. Ambassador Geeta Rao Gupta, former Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, U.S. Department of State, who will provide the opening remarks.
To WIIS, the Athena Initiative, the New Line Institute, and the Institute of World Affairs for bringing us together to mark this very important anniversary. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you in person, but I'm glad that I will be able to make a few remarks now. It's truly an honor to be with such a committed community of WPS and gender champions at this critical moment for WPS. Because today we gather not only to commemorate, but to reckon with where we are and to chart a path forward together. 25 years ago, UNSCR 1325 codified what women peace builders around the world already knew, that sustainable peace requires women's full and meaningful participation, not as an afterthought, not as window dressing, but as essential to success. And for many of those years, we built together. We created infrastructure, we appointed focal points, we drafted national action plans, we increased women's representation in security forces and peacekeeping missions, we gathered evidence proving what works, and the United States led in many of those efforts across administrations with bipartisan support. In fact, the Bush administration provided strong support when UNSCR 1325 was developed and initially implemented. In 2008, it was former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice who presided over the Security Council's adoption of the US-sponsored Resolution 1820, which recognized sexual violence as a weapon of war and as a crime against humanity. Later, the Obama administration established the Office of Global Women's Issues in the Department of State, an office that I was honored to lead many years later, which was tasked with the interagency coordination of the development and implementation of the first US National Action Plan in 2011 and each subsequent plan. Today, much of that architecture lies in ruins. Offices have been dismantled, experts fired, programs eliminated, funding cut. And the irony is devastating. Some of the very leaders who championed WPS legislation are now presiding over its destruction, calling it, in quotes, woke, while countries continue to burn and women peace builders do the work without us. At the UN, we're witnessing an alarming regression. Russia has become the United States' primary collaborator in stripping WPS language from resolutions. References to women's rights and participation are being removed from statements on Afghanistan, Sudan, and beyond. The progress we fought for together is being actively erased. This is the present moment, and it would be so easy to despair. But here's what I know. Movements are stronger and more resilient than infrastructure, and this has always been a movement. So where do we go from here? With hope, with collective resilience, and with innovation. First, we must innovate how we resource this work. For too long, we funneled support through government channels that can be shut down overnight. What if we created independent WPS funds that bypass traditional bureaucracies? Technology and creative financing may help us do this right. Second, we strengthen networks that transcend borders and institutions. When one government retreats, others must step forward. We need coalitions that are agile, that share resources across regions, that learn from each other's successes and failures. The regional centers of excellence that we were building in Colombia, Kosovo, and the Philippines, that model of peer-to-peer support and knowledge sharing is exactly what we need now, with or without US government backing. Third, we document and amplify what works. The evidence base for WPS is stronger than ever. We know that peace agreements are more durable when women participate. We know that women's leadership in security forces improves operational effectiveness. We have the data, so let's use it relentlessly in advocacy, in media, in every conversation with decision makers who are potential allies. Fourth, we build unlikely alliances. Some of our strongest WPS champions have come from unexpected places. Military leaders who see the operational value, security professionals who understand the strategic advantage, economists who recognize that stability requires gender equality. Let's find those champions wherever they are and mobilize them. And finally, we stay connected to why this matters. I think about the Sudanese women leaders who refused to sit on the sidelines of peace talks. They insisted on being in the room, and when they got there, they changed the outcome. They brought practical solutions that only people living through crises could offer. Those women didn't have government support. They didn't have formal roles. They had expertise, determination, and each other. That's our model going forward. We are strong, we are bold, and we are many. When formal structures fail us, we build new ones. When doors close, we find windows. When institutions abandon the work, movements carry it forward. The original architects of UNSCR 1325 faced enormous resistance. They built a global movement anyway. We inherit that legacy and that responsibility. So let's innovate, let's connect, let's resource directly, let's build coalitions that cannot be dismantled by a single election or executive order, and let's hold on to the hope that brought us here, even as we channel our anger into action. So let the work continue, because truly it continues with us. Thank you so much.
Wonderful message. Our second speaker is Michael Brown, a professor of international affairs and political science at George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. He was the dean of the Elliott School from 2005 to 2015, and he previously held appointments at Georgetown, Harvard, and the International Institute for Strategic Studies in London. He has served as the editor of the journal Survival and co-editor of International Security, which is the leading academic journal in the security studies field. He is the editor and co-editor of 23 books, including The Gender Security Agenda, Strategies for the 21st Century, and he is currently writing a co-authored book on men, masculinities, and international security. He teaches courses at GW on gender and security, and Professor Brown received his PhD in government from Cornell University. Professor Brown.
Thanks very much. Most of what I am going to talk about this morning is based on a couple of publications that I've co-authored with Chantal de Jonge-Altrat, who is known to most of you. Her expertise on gender and security issues is broad and deep. I'm a security studies guy who happens to be a pretty good editor. So Chantal thought it would be good from a gender balance point of view for me to be the official spokesperson of the team. You kindly mentioned the book that we published a few years ago. Kathleen has a chapter in it, and I just wanted to point out that it's now available for free via open access. And the paper that we wrote through WIIS, which was published just in the last couple of days, is available over here. and also online at the WIIS website. Normally, when people mention publications, they're trying to sell something. We're just trying to give stuff away. And we want you to be aware that these things are available. So the main question we were asked to address is how can the WPS agenda be reconceptualized, reclaimed, and safeguarded in the future? And I think one of the important points for us to keep in mind is that when we think about the WPS movement, there are non-governmental and governmental tracks. And in fact, non-governmental track, WPS activists and champions in the late 1990s, literally gave birth to the governmental track through the adoption of 1325 and the 9 resolutions that followed. And I think all of the points from Lauren and Ambassador Gupta about the importance of the movement at a grassroots and organizational level, that's tremendously important. But one of the reasons why the WPS movement has grown and advanced so much over the last 25 years is because there has been a governmental track, which has led to funding, but also action and programmatic activity that is massively enhanced if there is a strong governmental track. Non-governmental track also includes scholars and scholarship, and we can talk about that later if you want. One of the things that strikes me in looking back over the last 25, 35 years is that 25 years ago, there really was not a field of gender and security studies. There were a few scholars and analysts working on these issues, Ann Tickner and others doing important work. But now, in the year 2025, there is a scholarly field of gender and security studies, large number of professors, students, publications, journals. There's a scholarly literature, and our knowledge about these issues has grown massively over the last 25 years. And just like NGOs and WPS activists, scholars are going to keep doing what they do. We don't need permission from anybody to do it. And usually if you tell us not to do it, we just redouble our efforts because we're scholars and we don't listen to adult supervision. But it's a huge part of what's been going on here. We now know more about these problems and the solutions than we did 25 years ago. But I don't want to bury the lead here because we're being led by a professional journalist, and I want to respect the tradition. In the paper that we have just written, Chantal and I call for the creation, ratification, adoption, and entry into force of a WPS treaty in the UN General Assembly. And I take Lauren's points and Ambassador Gupta's points very much to mind that the movement has to continue. But just as the movement was advanced 25 years ago by the adoption of 1325, the movement will be advanced in the future if a WPS treaty can be adopted and entered into force via the General Assembly and the many allies that are still out there among countries and leaders of goodwill. So as a security studies guy, I'm guided by the old adage that the best defense is a good offense. And I think for the WPS movement, this is a time where we have to play defense and offense simultaneously. The UN Security Council is dead as far as WPS action is concerned for the foreseeable future. And just to put this in context, I think Donald Trump and his administration are far more dangerous to the WPS agenda than Vladimir Putin and Russia. And so getting this adopted through the General Assembly is, I think, a good idea because the General Assembly is broader and more representative. There are allies there that are supportive of the WPS agenda, and a WPS treaty would be supported by a coalition of the willing. It would be an institutional bulwark against the attacks that are being made. It would help to reinforce the legitimacy and visibility of the WPS agenda. And many of you would say, hey, we don't need the WPS agenda to be legitimized, but we do want to extend beyond the people in this room and the people who are in the movement. Having a WPS treaty would really matter. Having a WPS treaty campaign would also be a visible global concrete goal that people could be aiming for in the years ahead to help keep the visibility of the movement alive in governmental circles and among the general public. A WPS treaty would generate a platform that could also be a place for people to convene and for further action in the future. We can talk more about what should be in the treaty if you want. But in terms of who's going to do it, I think today, as in the late 1990s, if a WPS treaty is going to be created, it's going to come from WPS activists and champions in the non-governmental world, organizations like WIIS, the U.S. Civil Society Working Group, deciding to make this a priority along with other priorities. And just as in the late 1990s, that means figuring out who the allies might be among governments and starting this sort of multi-year process of drafting and mobilizing and forming an alliance of state and non-state actors to support this. And we think this would be a worthwhile thing to do. And there's a track record of success for these kinds of things. The Landmine Treaty, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And are they panaceas? No, but they are important pillars of the international order. And this would be a good time, we argue, to reinforce and create this new pillar for the WPS movement, which would be useful as a project, but also important as a platform for WPS action. Stop there and we can talk more later.
Thank you very much, Professor Brown. And we'll get back to some of your details in a minute, but I'd like to move on to Sherri Goodman. Sherri is a pioneer in sustainability and national security. And Sherri is among the most respected international voices on emerging global risks, including energy and climate and environmental security. The Pentagon's first ever Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security. Sherri led the efforts to transform the Department of Defense into a leader in sustainability and climate resilience. And her book, Threat Multiplier, which I am currently reading right now, very good. Threat Multiplier, oh, here we go. Climate, Military Leadership, and the Fight for Global Security give readers an inside account from the Pentagon to the battlefield of today's military on the front lines of climate change. Okay, today, Sherri serves as the Secretary General of the International Military Council on Climate Security, which is the leading international organization for national security and military leaders on climate and energy security. And she is a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council. So thank you, Sherri, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you so much, Kitty, and thank you to all the organizers. I think what I'm going to do, since unlike some of the other speakers here, I do not spend my 24/7 day on WPS issues, although I'm quite aware of them. And I see a lot of young people in the room thinking about, okay, what's my journey going to be in life and how am I going to focus? I'm going to just tell you a little bit about my own tale and how it aligns here with WIIS and the WPS movement and environment and climate security. So you can think about some of that as you are preparing and advancing your own professional and life journeys. So I noticed that WIIS was actually born the year 1987 that I finished graduate school. And I have degrees from Harvard Law School, Harvard Kennedy School, and I was always interested in international security. And during the Cold War, that was all about nuclear weapons and arms control. So my first book was actually on the neutron bomb, a case study in alliance politics, a small book. And I really launched my career serving as the first female professional staff member on the Senate Armed Services Committee in 1987. At in the former days of bipartisanship in Congress, I worked for Senator Sam Nunn, who was a very powerful chairman of the committee, and we worked very closely across the aisle with our Republican counterparts on nuclear weapons, on really all matters of the defense budget. But I particularly oversaw the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons accounts and the nuclear weapons complex in that day. And during that era of the 1980s, all of our weapons reactors and processing facilities in the United States failed from environment safety and health lapses, and they were shut down. And my career essentially went from weapons to waste. Instead of overseeing operating reactors and processing facilities, we were creating cleanup programs and figuring out how to deal with the end of the Cold War. Now we moved into that where we didn't need to make as much plutonium. A Republican Secretary of Energy said we were awash in plutonium at that time. And so both the Department of Energy, Defense, and really mirrored in countries around the world, really began to pay attention to their environmental responsibilities, both for cleaning up waste at military bases and for complying with environmental laws and for stewarding natural resources. And during the 90s, when I served for 8 years as the first Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Environmental Security, we were working with countries around the world, particularly Russia and many of the former Soviet Union countries, not only to denuclearize and remove nuclear weapons, but to reduce environmental risks associated with military activities. And so that led to the sort of first understanding, and here I'd say it's sort of parallel with the WPS movement in the sense that at the, WPS being now formally 25 years old, that was about the 2000. That was in my last years in the Pentagon as the chief environmental officer, but it was a time when increasing attention had been paid over the decade to environmental responsibilities. But let's be very clear about it, because I think this is also true in women, peace, and security. It's not just for the sake of women. It's not just for the sake of environment. Okay, as good as that is, I mean, those are all high values. But if you're working in a security context, the mission comes first, right? So we always, in environmental security, we talk about how it's more about the mission than emissions, okay? And even though it's good to reduce emissions, you have to do it in alignment with your military objectives. In other words, what's your performance? How do you want to counter those hybrid threats, those strategic competition that we face? And so that led, for me, my journey then followed after the Defense Department to the Center for Naval Analysis, which, like Grant, is a federally funded research and development center where I founded the first group of generals and admirals to assess the national security implications of climate change. And our report on that in 2007 characterized climate change as a threat multiplier, hence the title of my book, leading to increased volatility around the world from Earth system changes. I won't go into the whole spiel about climate as a security matter, but we see it around the world, from a changing Arctic to more fragile Pacific Island states, existential. We could do a tour around the world, but that journey and that attention, which has led to a field of scholarship in climate and security, much as Michael was talking about, now there's a whole field of scholarship in women peace that exists separate from whatever governments do or don't do. Obviously, we're at a low point in both of these fields now on governmental action. So we need those unlikely alliances, as Ambassador Gupta said, to be found in military security actors, other actors around the world that still see this as part of their mission. And what I would say, to all of you as you're thinking about sort of where you go in your careers, be open to what that journey is. It may not be what you expect today. I didn't actually study anything having to do with environment when I was in school. It was not yet a really big topic. And as I said, I was going to work on nuclear weapons. So, your life can take different turns. Your network really matters. My dad was worked at IBM most of his life, and he always said, Sherri, it's about the network. And yet he really didn't know that much about computers. He was funny, but he was a great people person. And his network was the network of people he built. And that's the same for you in this community. but also I'd say in multiple communities. Be open to sort of creating those unlikely alliances. We all have like family members and friends now who don't all think the same way we do. We're struggling with how do we cope with that at this very, in this dysfunctional time. But sort of being open to that and then building at the speed, decisions move at the speed of trust. And women are really good at creating those trusted networks. And so, to all of you, thank you for being involved with this. Thank you for inviting me here today. I hope you will consider reading or buying my book, and I'm happy to talk more with you about it.
Thank you. Very good. Our final speaker, Kathleen Kuehnast, is the former director of Women, Peace, and Security Program at the U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. And prior to joining USIP, she spent 15 years at the World Bank as a senior social scientist, focusing on women in poverty, social capital, and community-driven development in fragile and post-conflict contexts. And her regional expertise is Central Asia. This past weekend, I'm delighted to report, breaking news, right? She was given the University of Minnesota's Alumni of Notable Achievement Award. So congratulations on that. Kathleen.
Well, thank you all. It's so nice to see you. It's just like a reunion for me. And congratulations, Lauren, and to your outstanding team for this workshop today. It's very important. Thank you for the invitation. It really is an honor to join my fellow panelists here who are notable experts on WPS. Well, having worked as an anthropologist here in Washington for the past 30 years, I've often felt like an outsider, especially in the realms of foreign policy and international relations. However, the WPS agenda has always felt like home to me, as it was fundamentally created as a multidisciplinary effort to establish a global policy that centers women. The WPS agenda, I would say, was revolutionary in its approach. It recentered the fields of security and peace building by elevating women from an invisible space to a visible space, thereby enabling empowerment. So this panel this morning is aiming to help us address how do we position this agenda for the future and to secure in a time when rules and right-based governance are under threat. Well, this question really resonates with me, especially in light of recent events. In the past 7 months, the congressionally mandated and funded U.S. Institute of Peace was shuttered by DOGE, the Department of Governmental Efficiency. On January 31st, all of our WPS work from the last 17 years was removed from the USIP website due to an executive order by President Trump targeting work considered to be gender ideology. Page 4 of the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 noted ahead of time in 2023, deleting all terms such as sexual orientation, gender identity, diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as all related concepts from every federal rule, agency regulation, contract, grant, and piece of legislation, just to put it out there. By March 18th, our entire email history was erased, so if I never responded, my apologies publicly to you all. It has not been revived. And 12 days after this, all the staff was terminated without severance or health insurance. These actions underscore that WPS is not simply under threat, it is under direct threat, attack with the intent to truly dismantle it. So when I started thinking about how do we move forward from these kind of direct threats, what are the innovative ideas? And my colleagues here have put out an amazing list, and I'm going to just add to that. I actually found great support from my colleagues from the Women Building Peace Award and others I have worked with through many years at USIP. And I asked them for their advice in this question. And so they have lived through authoritarian regimes and conflict. And they were some of the first people, because they didn't get rid of my WhatsApp, thank goodness, who reached out to me to provide support. We will make it through this. And certainly I hear Geeta's remarks about strengthening these networks. So Esther Omam from Cameroon, Vasaka Damadarsa from Sri Lanka, and Zuabe Tinin from Papua New Guinea offered some thoughts for us to consider today. From the front lines of Cameroon's conflicted areas of deep civil war, Esther writes that what is evident is women's participation transforms fear into hope, and I think this is important, despair into dialogue. Dialogue is a word that we need to bring forward because we must know our opponents. Our world today requires courageous leadership rooted in compassion. That's a hard one because it's hard to get beyond our anger. The WPS agenda reminds us that sustainable peace is possible only when women are not merely invited to the table, but are empowered to shape it. And so it is crucial to listen deeply and act boldly. And when women lead peace efforts, communities rebuild faster, reconciliation becomes tangible, and justice is humanized. Not one of those statements dealt with a policy. They were everyday actions that we have to perform. Vasaka from Sri Lanka emphasizes the need to recognize the achievement of US women. That was hard, like, oh, what amount? I mean, we're a global entity. But she emphasized their progress in governance, business, and the military is essential because these strides not only benefit the US, but US women have served as powerful examples for women worldwide. She reminds us that we see a trend of women taking leadership roles in governance of such countries as Japan, Mexico, Ireland, and Namibia. And a little closer to home, this was just last week, she notes that women are currently serving as governors in 12 states. And just last Tuesday, we can add Virginia and New Jersey to that list in January. That really hit me. 14 states are led by women. We need to look at this kind of approach too. We've been so internationally that we have not always looked to the national. She does feel, though, that the US has a responsibility to implement this agenda fully, not only as an example to the world, but really at this moment, since we face so much adversity, how we are going to pull together to address it directly. And finally, Zuabe's message from Papua New Guinea. The arguably probably one of the highest levels of violence against women in the world today. And Zuabe works in Leh City and the region and lives it every day. She said not to forget about the indigenous people worldwide, because in the crosshairs of gender equality and environmental protection and climate change, there lie the indigenous people. She offers that their real voices and concerns, they are often the true managers of the daily natural resources, and they never are heard by the national or international governing bodies. She asks for this to change, in part because violence is experienced intensely in this resource-rich country where the unfair distribution of wealth is implemented and where violence is women's every day. So these are important thoughts for the way forward in terms of WPS as we have this pivotal year of reflection moving forward. And I would suggest 2026 be named the year of getting organized and developing a strategy. And we have Michael and Chantal's really interesting way forward that we need to seriously contemplate and consider. Finally, Esther says, let this decade be the one of renewed courage. Invest in women's local leadership and peace infrastructures. Amplify the voices from the field, not as beneficiaries, but as partners and leaders. And bridge the gaps between policy and practice with empathy, accountability, and a shared vision. Peace begins where women rise. Women, peace, and security is not a policy to be quoted, as they say, it is a promise to be lived. May we live. Thank you.
So this is such an interesting panel because we've gone from like global, international to the power of the individual. Just this arc really strikes me. And also with the historical perspective that we have, all of us have been in this movement for a while, have been around for a while, and we've seen a lot of world change. One of the questions I'd like to put to my panel for discussion really is, we have seen Russia and China thwarting WPS agenda, right? But some countries are decreasing their financials and cultural support for the programs. So my question is, what is the role of the US in the international context? And Michael, I sort of defer to you as an internationalist on this panel. Is it necessary to have an international effort that the US engages in, or maybe a doubling down on targeting certain national action plans that are actually not being dismantled, that the US can engage with? How does the US engage on the global stage in our current context, which we realize is very challenging? And your idea about the treaty is wonderful. And the sort of double down on that is, what kind of support might you get for a treaty? Or is this a sort of one-on-one targeting diplomatic, academic, sort of grassroots push on an international scale to advance the agenda, which the United States has been very much a big part of?
Yeah, thanks. Well, that's a key issue. And at least when I think about the WPS movement, I think in terms of multiple tracks, multiple levels, multiple actors. Some are in, some are out, some are for, and some are very much against. And I think we just have to write off the U.S. federal government for the foreseeable future. I'm not even sure when or if Donald Trump will leave the White House. And as Kathleen pointed out, I mean, not only has all the funding been eliminated, programs have been eliminated, jobs and careers have been eliminated, and it's not going to come back as long as Donald Trump is in the White House, and we just have to accept that. The damage caused by the elimination of U.S. aid is massive. I mean, everybody knows that in per capita terms, U.S. contributions to foreign aid over the years have not been great on a per capita basis, but on an absolute basis, they're massive, far greater than Japan or any of the other OECD countries contributing. And the loss of that money is massive and is going to have huge impacts on development programs and WPS related programs around the world, in Papua New Guinea, tragically in many other countries. Millions of lives are going to be lost because of the elimination of U.S. aid and its funding. That's going to happen, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do about that in the next few years. But the U.S. federal government is not the only U.S. government, and Kathleen's really, insightful to point out what can be done at the state level. Not going to happen in every state, but can happen in many states. And as many people know, I mean, California's economy is massive. and also at the local and community level. But we just have to also be thinking globally. And I think one of the reasons we thought a WPS treaty would be a good idea is because the Security Council is just a lost cause. And as Ambassador Gupta pointed out, a lot of work is being, actually erased at the UN and elsewhere. And having a WPS treaty would be a way of creating a bulwark against that and a platform for further action. And it would be a coalition of the willing. Is it going to be all 193 member states of the UN? Of course not. But if it's a few dozen, if it's 50, if it's 75, if it's 100, it's a coalition of the willing. And do states always live up perfectly to their commitments under international treaties? Of course not. This is planet Earth. But states are more likely to live up to their commitments if they're doing it voluntarily. And we would be replacing UN Security Council exhortations and commandments, thunderbolts coming down from on high, to a coalition of the willing countries and people who are intentionally supportive of the WPS agenda. And unfortunately, I think it's just not going to be possible to replace U.S. government funding in the future. It's hard to be wildly optimistic about more money coming from European countries because of their focus on Russia and Ukraine and their own needs to prioritize a rebuilding of their defense industrial bases. But it's also true that the funding that goes to WPS has always been minuscule in comparison to the Pentagon's budget or any other defense budget. So the money that would be needed from other countries isn't great in terms of percentages of their federal budget. And hopefully some countries will at least fill in some of the gap, but it's going to be hard to do. But mobilizing those countries to focus on this issue now is important because I think at the governmental and at the UN level, everybody recognizes that Security Council is a lost cause. The Secretariat at the UN is playing defense because it's facing budget cuts. There's been some talk of UN women being folded into some sort of conglomerate with the UN population agency, which would be a massive setback. And everybody should be focusing on that and preempting that and trying to stop that from happening. Having UN women as a distinct entity at the UN is important. We have to play defense there. And the treaty would also be, as I've been saying, defense and offense.
Yeah. Anything on this from the rest of our panel, or should I move on to my next question? Okay, so Sherri, I wanted to ask you, in reading your book, I'm just struck at your breadth of experience in sort of taking a minuscule topic like environment and, climate change, and then over the course of your career, it has ballooned into this massive thing. You took that and carried it to the Department of Defense and said, hey, time to pay attention, right? I'm struck by the power of the individual. We talk about the power of the collective, right? And we're talking about coalitions and building bridges, but the power of one individual is always key in changing a mindset in a room, at a kitchen table, in a boardroom. I guess this is a tough question for you. It's a rather personal question. What qualities should we all be aspire to be the Malala of WPS? We all aspire to be the iconic person of WPS, right? I hope that someone in this room is. I'm really looking forward to seeing you step up and be that person. But what qualities does it take to get something that is not being paid attention to, that is being somewhat dismissed? And how do you get it from A to B? And I really, reading your book is really interesting how many walls you actually had to run full steam into to get to where you are now. I would love your advice, and I know everyone else would.
Thanks, Kitty. What I can't really claim, I don't claim in any way sole credit for this work that has evolved, because leadership is all about building communities and building a collective will to action and alignment of views. And so, I mean, I had the, you know, I had the good fortune of, being in the right place at the right times in my career, and then being given an opportunity. Let's say when I went to the Defense Department to head environmental security at the beginning of the Clinton administration, we did have Al Gore as vice president, and he was sort of environmental conscience of the administration. And we had many members of Congress, but also there are three secretaries of defense for whom I served, and the military leaders themselves were all the ones that helped sort of elevate attention and put environment and later climate security into the context of actionable uh, mission areas, uh, both threats and opportunities that form the basis of a variety of strategies over now several decades. So it's about building, creating that leadership momentum. And so, I mean, I'll say that it just, as I talked about, my dad always told me it's about the network. So I've always been someone who, wants to create a broad network, wants to get to know a lot of people. Early in my career, when most of the people I worked for were older than me and all men, I had to figure out how was I going to connect with them and how were they going to take me seriously in what I was doing. Um, and one of the reasons I went into nuclear weapons and security is because that was like hard, that was hard power. And if you wanted to be serious in those days as a woman, you got to be doing the stuff that the guys are doing, right? Now that's changed, I think, a lot of it. And when I got the environmental portfolio at Defense, I had to figure out how to make that interesting and attractive to military leaders, and because decisions are made at, in the Department of Defense, you really need to have the 4 stars and the secretaries and the leadership bought in. Otherwise, as we say, a strategy without budget is hallucination. And I tell some stories of my early budget failures in the Department of Defense when I didn't understand how the budget worked and when I didn't have the alignment with the leadership. But I worked hard to cultivate relationships, as an example, with the chief of staff of the military services and the Army chief of staff at the time, General Gordon Sullivan, who later became the first chair of the CNA Military Advisory Board and became my deep personal friend, was something that, and then he helped not only transform the Army after the end of the Cold War, but he really brought an environmental awareness into the military. So I think it's about building those coalitions with the right set of people, being open to understanding how to frame things, not always pushing your own ideas. I mean, as General Sullivan may always say, he always would say, "I'm not the smartest person in the room, and I want it that way." Right? In academia, sometimes you're like, "Well, you got to be the smartest person," but in business, in military leadership, in many walks of life, good leaders know they're not the smartest, but they know how to work with a range of people.
Thank you. I want to open it up. I don't mean to shortchange Kathleen, but I want to open it up to the room because I know I want to give you access to these excellent minds. And so anyone, feel free to ask a question. Sir, in the back. Oh, we cannot hear you. This is not on.
Hi, I'm Don Steinberg. I'm Executive Director of Mobilizing Allies for Women, Peace, and Security. I was very intrigued by the discussion of the treaty for WPS, and I really appreciated your mentioning the landmine treaty in particular as an example. I think what we found, and I was Bill Clinton's advisor for fighting landmines back in the day, and I think what we found with that treaty is that it only proceeded when the United States decided not to sign it. That served as a foil that allowed other countries to push it more strongly. It encouraged American congressmen, Pat Leahy in particular, to step forward. Civil society took over. And it also eliminated the red lines that we were facing in adopting that treaty. I am wondering if a similar phenomenon can occur with the WPS movement in the sense that we are seeing state and local governments, foundations, other donors, international organizations, other kinds of funders stepping in to replace US funding now. Also, as the former deputy administrator for AID, I know that the elimination of that agency can never be replaced. You cited the deaths. The latest estimate is that 14 million people will die within the next decade from the elimination of USAID. It's a terrible thing, but can we find a mobilizing aspect to this as we move forward?
That, those are terrific observations. And yeah, this morning is actually the first time that Chantal and I have made a public presentation or discussion about the paper. You are all the first people to hear about it. The WIIS paper was just printed up a couple of weeks ago. This is the first time it's being distributed. And so if anything ever comes of this, you can all say you were present at the creation. But if anything is ever going to come of this, we're all going to have to do something about it. And Don, I think your organization could be part of it. WIIS, the U.S. Civil Society Working Group. I hope that the great and the good figure out how to put a task force together to get this started. And I think your point about the U.S. is extremely well taken, especially in this context, because obviously Donald Trump is not going to support a WPS treaty, although if he thought it would help him get a Nobel Peace Prize, he would support it. But the ideologues in his administration, and Kathleen, you pointed to Project 2025, they're intensely opposed to all of this. They're erasing women from the U.S. federal government's website, as well as the Enola Gay bomber, because it's just way too gay for them. Literally, that's happened. And so I think for a lot of governments and people around the world, if they really want to do something that will piss Donald Trump off, this would be it. And so that's, I think, just a small added reason for doing this. But this is something that Donald Trump is not going to support, or Vladimir Putin, or Xi Jinping. It's going to be up to the rest of the world to do this. And I think the rest of the world is a pretty big group. I mean, there were over 100 WPS NAPs adopted over the years. A lot of them were just symbolic and pretty thin. A lot of them did not have money behind them. But a lot of leaders and governments understand that it would be worthwhile to do something that is supported by about half or more of their population. And so even in authoritarian governments, there's an understanding that it's good to have some of the people behind you. And certainly in democracies, certainly in the EU and other members of the OECD. And so, yeah, I think, Don, you made a really good point. The U.S. is clearly not going to be in favor of this, and this would have the added value of doing something to undo some of the damage caused by the U.S. You can't undo all of it because the damage is massive, but this, I think, would be an important step.
We're going to go to another question. Yes, this lady here, there's a mic coming your way.
Hi, my name's Emma. So I, like a lot of people in this room, am like early in my career and a young professional. You all spoke, especially Kathleen, you spoke a lot about the importance of getting creative with involvement and sort of what that looks like on a community level. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about any advice you have for getting involved, as the job market is relatively non-existent right now for young professionals to really get involved directly in a work related manner. But what ways from a community based lens, or really anything, would you suggest that we start doing the work? Because right now we can't start in our traditional work life setting. So where would you advise that we start? Thank you.
First of all, thanks to Emma. And so two ideas for you. First, know your opponent. We have an opponent here. And I mentioned Project 2025. I hope you've read it because it is a playbook and there are a lot of entry points that we need to be aware of to um, basically understand what's next or how we're going to, as Lauren said, interrupt or I would say disrupt what's to come. We've got to know what we're playing. You know, Michael talked about playing defense and offense at the same time. Hamlet said, the preparation is all, and we have to get prepared. I don't think we are. I think in many ways, we couldn't imagine, we could not imagine what has the last, 10 months brought to everyone's lives. So that's number one. Number two, you probably didn't hear about Kalo Herr, the new mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota. You haven't understood yet. I am from Minnesota. She wasn't covered in any of the international or national news of last week. But at 3 years old, she was a refugee from Vietnam War. She was Hmong, and her parents came here. And she was, I keep looking at that sign, education is transformational. It changes lives. It's like, it changed her life in that she was educated and she went on to be a community activist. And then she became someone on the city council, and she just slowly but surely and confidently worked herself into this position as mayor of 500,000 people. And I think that's where the local matters right now. And that's where the states matter. This is an amazing opportunity to make a difference when it is harder to do it at this kind of policy level, which many of us have been playing in this arena for a very long time. So,
I think Michael wanted to say one thing, and then we're almost out of time. But what I want to say before I wrap this panel, which has been really interesting, is that we are all really nice people, and you can come and ask us anything you want. Okay, so if you have a burning question out there, please come and approach us after this panel. Michael, last word?
One other option I want to mention for young people who are looking for jobs like in the next year or two, and that's the national security policy arena. And getting into government, as Sherri was doing, learning how things work, and establishing yourself professionally, and keeping in mind that governmental jobs in WPS hopefully will come back at some point. But certainly there's funding and jobs in the defense world because that's the way the world works. There are other ways to get to where you want to go. Life is a protracted process. Most of you are young in your 20s. Donald Trump is 79. He's not going to be around forever. Prepare yourself for the long haul. And that's one way to develop some expertise and professional advancement to prepare yourself for what comes in round two.
Fantastic advice. We have to wrap it here, but thank you so much, Michael Goodman, Michael Brown, Sherri Goodman.